Hello again, welcome back for another week. This week we're going to talk about clinical trial monitoring, and we're going to talk about it in some detail. I know this has come up in the other CLST classes, but this is sort of going to be a little more nuts and bolts. What does a monitor do? What can you expect from the monitor, and sort of how will you interact with a monitor? So hopefully this will give you some really good perspective as not only what really they do, what are they required to do, and sort of really why they do what they do. So here we go. ICH has a lot more information about monitoring than the CFR. Most of this lecture will be about ICH because this is really where details exist. So the purpose of the monitor is going to do three different things for the trial. The first thing that the monitor is going to do is make sure that the rights of all the people enrolled in this trial are protected. This is a really good, important thing. This is good to have an outside party, whether it is a CRO or with a sponsor, to assure that your site is maintaining all the rights and the welfare of people enrolled. How are they going to do this, though? The very first thing, and this is the easiest thing for them to do in order to assure that all the human rights are being maintained, is to look at the written informed consent. So they're going to want to look at every consent form that has been signed by a participant on the study. They're going to want to look at not only the very first one that was signed, but they want to look at subsequent ones. If there have been any revisions to the consent form that would apply to that participant, they're going to want to see that those were signed as well. And this is the easiest way, because for them to assure that the rights and welfare have been maintained, because the written informed consent document is the primary vehicle by which we respect the autonomy of the individual on the trial. So they're going to want to look at every written consent form. They're also going to want to make sure that only people who are eligible for the trial were enrolled. This becomes important from a human rights perspective, because with an investigational drug, there are risks that are unforeseen, and so it would be ethically wrong to expose someone to the risks if they weren't justified by eligibility. So making sure that the participants that are enrolled meet all of the inclusion criteria and none of the exclusion criteria. So do they have this and do they not have that? And everything has to be in order. I think that enrolling ineligible subjects is inexcusable, and if I were a monitor, I would have great concerns about a site that enrolled someone who is ineligible. So bear that in mind as you're going through your internship. They're also going to want to verify that all of the adverse events, all of the concomitant medications, so all the medications that were taking at the same time the investigational drug was being taken, such as over-the-counter medications, prescription medications, herbal medications, and things like that, as well as intercurrent illnesses are reported. All of these things get back to creating the safety profile for this investigational drug. The more accurate the safety profile is, the more let me just back up and see, the more accurate the safety profile is, the better it will be for the public at large if this drug were to receive FDA approval. So they're going to really want to go through and verify a lot of these things, because how these events are reported impacts potential patients down the road. Not just for the people who are enrolled on the trial now, but eventually for people in the future. They're going to want to also know that things that were not performed that were required by the protocol, such as office visits for physical exams, any kind of blood work, imaging, x-rays, MRIs, anything like that, that are missed for whatever reason, are reported as not performed. We talked about acts of omission and acts of commission, so this is really important to make sure that everything that isn't done is acknowledged. The second purpose of the monitoring is to make sure the submitted data is accurate, complete, and verifiable. The FDA is going to ask questions about, is the drug efficacious, and what is its safety profile like? And so that is going to be dependent on making sure that the submitted data is quality. So how do they do that? What are some things that a monitor will do to verify that the data is reliable? the first thing that the monitor is going to do is verify source documents. And they're going to look at all the source documents. Remember, that's the first place where data is originally recorded. And they're going to look at everything about this patient that's enrolled to make sure that it's accurate, it's complete, and current. This includes cross-referencing things within your source documents. For example, if your PI sees the patient and documents a grade 3 rash, and then the next day the patient comes in and sees a different investigator, but that investigator documents a grade 2 rash, your monitor should pick up the fact that there's a discrepancy and find a way to resolve that. So they're going to be extremely thorough about this, not just going through and checking, yes, this is there, that is that. They're going to go through and with a fine-tooth comb, for a good monitor, with a fine-tooth comb and really make sure that they're complete and that that data really represents the patient on the study. They're going to make sure that the data is accurately transcribed from that original source document into the case report form, and that the data that's been transcribed is consistent with the source documents. Because remember, what I just said on the previous slide is that the data has to be verifiable. So if the blood pressure was 118 over 82, and you write 112 over 88, right? That's a transcription error that would be, human nature to make. Your monitor is going to go through and make sure that everything is transcribed correctly onto the case report form. So if you had the numbers transposed in that example, your source document would not match up with your case report form, and the monitor would find that. Now, you're a good research coordinator, you're going to catch that error that you made yourself before the monitor gets there. However, human nature being what it is, the monitor will be able to verify and find if there are mistakes. Also, they're going to do a lot of verification regarding the dose of the investigational drug, the whole dosing schedule, and whether there are any modifications to the dosing schedule, and that these are all documented thoroughly for each subject, especially in studies where there are various dose levels and in studies where there are modification schedules. These are going to be really, really important to have documented correctly to make sure that the adverse events that are being reported match up with what the dose was at the time for that patient. So this will be important for the future. So I made the example of the case report form where you had transposed a number on the blood pressure. They're going to investigate and inform any investigator of the case report form errors. When I say they inform the investigator, what they're really going to be doing is talking to you. You're going to be the person on the ground that's going to be dealing with the monitor. Most monitors will only meet with the investigator maybe once during a visit. And so they're really going to be talking to you about any case report form entry errors. For errors that cannot be resolved, you might have to go and speak to the investigator, or they might speak to the investigator, but this is going to be really primarily with you. And they're going to want to make sure that discrepancies are resolved. In the case of the blood pressure example, that's an easy discrepancy to resolve. They're going to point out to you that your original document has 118 over 82 marked, and that you marked it 112 over 88. Right? They're going to point that out, and you're going to you look right at it and say, "Wow, how did I do that?" There are going to be some discrepancies from time to time that are very technical in nature. And these are usually the data that originates from the investigator and his or her own medical expertise. And monitors who come to do monitoring are not, I've never known of one that has been a physician. And so there are going to be discrepancies that the monitor might feel very strongly about and might talk to your investigator. At the end of the day, it is the investigator's discretion about some technical things. So if there is a huge dispute about something technical, the investigator will prevail. And that might not be resolvable to the monitor's satisfaction. And that does happen every once in a blue moon. But most of the entry errors are going to just be sort of simple things that are easy to fix. And the last thing, the third thing that monitors will do, and the third purpose, is to make sure that your site complies with all the regulations that are that are applicable. So some of these kinds of things can involve verification that your investigator has adequate qualifications and resources throughout the trial. Your site and your investigator had already been chosen because of adequate qualifications and resources, because we already have that established in ICH. But what happens if something changes during the course of the study? If your investigator leaves and assigns the study to a different investigator, they're going to want to make sure that those qualifications are the same or comparable. Or if there are like maybe residents added to the study, or physicians and fellowships added to the study, the monitor is going to want to verify that those new additions are adequately qualified to do the study. And they're going to also make sure that you have the resources throughout the trial, because resources change over time. Now, the two things that are going to come from the sponsor are your investigational brochure. And as a reminder, the investigational brochure is the compilation of all of the known information about that investigational drug. And it is published annually by the sponsor. So you'll get an investigator brochure every year. So they have to supply that to you. And the sponsor is also responsible for giving you trial supplies. So the monitor will not only verify things that you are responsible or your investigator is responsible for, such as the personnel, but that monitor is going to make sure that you have everything that you need to do the study. And so those will be some things that they'll be responsible for. So they're also going to make sure that you have accurate drug inventory, that you are storing the drug correctly, and that you're dispensing it correctly. So this is going to be really important. If you go remember all the way back to that story about thalidomide, there were no regulations about drug supply at the time, and now we have pretty good regulations to say if it's an investigational drug, we don't know what the risks are, we don't know how well it works, then we're going to keep a very close eye on that inventory. So your monitor will often either deal with you or your pharmacist to confirm that you have the inventory that's expected. They're going to confirm the dispensing records, so every patient who's been on the trial who's been dispensed investigational drug, and the dates and the dosage. And then they're also going to make sure that drug is stored in proper conditions. Now, what proper conditions are can really be a bit of conversation sometimes. Most specifically, your site wants to be able to demonstrate that the investigational drug is maintained in some type of secure way. So whether it's in a pharmacy that is behind a coded door that's locked at all times, or if it's in a cabinet that's locked at all times, these are going to be some discussions to have with the monitor, and actually these discussions should be had up front while you're negotiating the contract. Everyone has sort of a different idea of what a proper storage condition is, but you do have to be able to demonstrate at the site that you have processes in place to maintain that drug safely. So they're going to want to come and count your medication. The monitor is also going to verify that your investigator follows the protocol and the contract. So when I say the investigator follows the approved protocol, that's the investigator and everybody else working on the study. And they're going to be able to determine that all the investigator, the sub-investigators, and everybody involved are following the protocol by looking at and seeing that the participants are doing all of the expected activities at the correct time point. So they'll be able to tell by that just by looking at the case report forms, but they are going to want to make sure that there is ability to demonstrate that your site is following the protocol and the contract. The monitor is also going to verify that everyone's adequately trained about the trial. So the sponsor is going to do some initial training for everybody on that trial. But then they're going to say, okay, internally, how is that information disseminated? So how does the research coordinator deal with maybe nurses in the hospital? How does the research coordinator deal with new people that are brought onto the study? How is the investigator teaching the other medical staff and things like that? So they're going to want to make sure that everybody is really well trained internally about the trial, especially if new personnel come on board. few more things about the regulations and the monitor's responsibilities. The monitor must also verify the investigator is maintaining the essential documents. And just as a little primer, the essential documents are everything that is created as part of the study. So that starts with the study contract, all the negotiations for that, the investigator's brochure that informed consent, all of the IRB correspondence, all the IRB approvals, the annual reports to the IRBs. The list goes on and on and on. Excuse me. ICH actually has in their glossary a definition of what essential documents are. And so the monitor is going to make sure that these are all maintained in full. So that means that the monitor is going to spend some very, very, in my opinion, boring time looking at all of these documents to make sure that nothing is missing. If they find something that's missing, they're going to either ask the sponsor to resend it to you, or they're going to ask you to get it from the IRB. But they're going to be very, very thorough here, and they're going to make sure that you have everything that you're supposed to have in your record. So most monitors will do and review the essential documents on every visit in order to keep it from becoming a avalanche of documents to look for. And then they're also going to communicate any deviations that they find to the investigator, right? So when I say the monitor must communicate deviations from the protocol, from any of their own internal SOPs, from good clinical practice, any federal regulations, they're going to let the investigator know, because it's just not really all that helpful for the monitor to know what's not working and keep it a secret. The monitor really wants to make sure that your site is successful. And so they are going to tell your investigator, well, they're probably going to tell you first and formally, and they will meet with the investigator before they leave for their visit. And they're going to tell them, tell you and the investigator what they're finding that's deficient. This point of the visit, when they go down a laundry list of all these things, it's going to be human nature for you to think, oh, that's so picky. Oh, that's so tiny. Oh, get a life. Don't worry about that. This is their job. This is how the monitor helps you and verifies that you are current with all the regulations. Most of the time, the deviations will stem from a missed patient visit that's required by protocol, or something that's missing that's required by protocol, or case report form errors. Those are usually the two most common things that monitors are going to find, and some of them are going to seem so tiny and inconsequential. But their job is to really make sure that you're following the regulations. So when you get to this point of the visit, remember what they're supposed to be doing, why they're telling you about these things, so that you don't feel a little offended. It's just natural, and it's just part of being human to feel very protective of the study you've worked so hard on. But be open to them, because this will make your study that much better. When they do this, they have to find a way to make sure that you are going to do this and prevent future deviations. So they're going to look at a big system-wide kind of thing. If you make an error on a case report form entry, that's minor, right? If you correct it, they will not mention it. But if they start to see patterns of things, so if they find a pattern that every patient is missing their week 2, day 1 visit, they're going to say there's a trend there. There's a problem with following the protocol. Not just, and if one patient misses because their car broke down, that is not really going to be something that is going to make the monitor concerned. But if there is a systematic problem, they're going to sit down and talk to you and the investigator and try to come up with an action plan so this doesn't continue to happen. Sometimes the action can be on their part. It can be maybe we need to do more training at the site. The action could be on their part. Maybe you do not have adequate supplies to do something. So they will really sit and look and think about what can we do so that this doesn't happen again. Remember, if the deviations continue, the sponsor does have the right to stop shipping investigational drug to your site, so that they effectively stop your study. So at the end of all this, we have a lot of conversations that are going on, a lot of communications, but there is going to be a requirement for a monitoring report. The monitor is going to submit a written report to the sponsor after each visit. Now, they're going to sit and tell you before they leave what is going on, what they found that's a problem. but then they are going to, according to ICH, send a written report to the sponsor. Oftentimes they will send you a written report as well. As a matter of fact, I've never met a monitor who did not include a written report to the investigator. The written report that they're going to send to you is really helpful for you to prepare for the next visit. But they're also going to send this report to the sponsor. And there includes some very important things according to ICH. They're going to say a summary of everything that was reviewed. If you have 20 participants on your study and they were only able to review and verify the documents for the first 12 patients, they're going to say that in their report. I did patients 1 through 12, and they'll tell you then in their report or verbally while they're there, I will review numbers 13 through 20 next time. But they're going to be very specific about what they reviewed. They're going to include any significant findings. Now, when you made that little mistake with the blood pressure before and you corrected it, that's not going to be a significant finding. They're going to talk about things that are trends. They're going to talk about any actions that were taken. The actions can be recommendations that your site's going to do. You can be the one that recommends the action that will be taken, but they're going to include that in their report to the sponsor, and then the recommendations. They might, like for example, have more training and things like that. But these are at the very minimum the 4 things that will be included into the sponsor's report. If you're a really good site, this will be a very short report. If you have lots of systematic problems, this might be a much longer report. But you can use this written report to, like I mentioned before, plan for your next monitoring visit. Monitors will come on a regular basis. There is nothing in the Code of Federal Regulations that says how often they have to come, but they will come on a regular basis, every 4 weeks, every 12 weeks, depending on how many patients you have on the study and what the workload is like. So you could use this to get ready for your next visit. So what is monitoring? What's the word? What do we have to know about monitoring in 21 CFR 312? We went through ICH. There was a lot in there. Monitoring, the Code of Federal Regulations is very loosey-goosey about this. Sponsors must monitor the progress of all clinical trials to ensure compliance with the protocol and with whatever regulations are at hand. That's pretty broad. It doesn't say what they'll do, doesn't say what the mission is. Like the ICH said, we've got 3 reasons we're going to send a monitor out. This doesn't say anything other than the sponsors must monitor the progress. It doesn't say they have to monitor it by physically sending someone to the site. They can do a combination of monitoring it via a web application and face-to-face monitoring. There's all sorts of really room in here for the sponsor to determine how they want to do this. But the sponsor is responsible for assuring compliance, and they're going to use monitoring to do that. That's all this really says. And the sponsor must select monitors with appropriate training and experience. Do you remember where you've seen this language before? Sponsors must select investigators with appropriate training and experience as well. So the sponsor's going to have to find people to monitor who have the appropriate training and experience, and that's very vague. A lot of times there will be sponsors who hire people with no experience doing this and perhaps an educational background not in the medical field at all. I've known monitors that were English literature degree holders, for example. In those cases, the sponsors will select people to be monitors based on other internal criteria that they establish, and then they will train them themselves. And then after their internal training is done, the sponsor will be able to verify that that person has appropriate training, and then they will get field experience with another monitor for a period of time. This is all 21 CFR has to say about it. So this is really, I would have to say, in comparison to ICH, not a lot of detail and not a lot of structure for monitors. So ICH is very helpful. So hopefully this lecture has been useful for you to figure out, sort of understand why monitors do what they do. If you don't have the background to understand the objectives and the regulations that apply to monitors, they can seem like they're just sort of overstepping and perhaps a little overbearing. But once you understand what they do, you'll understand then why they want to look at your drug supply, why they want to look at your regulatory documents, why they want to do all sorts of things. And then as a result, you can help them to be more successful at your site. As always, questions are good. I'd love to answer them. If anything didn't make sense or you want some more clarification, please just drop me a line, call me, whatever works for you, and I will talk to you again soon. Take care.